So let's go ahead and move on to our last story. I wanted to go, people have asked me about, like what I personally believe and personal experiences I've had. And I'm pretty open with what I personally believe, but personal experiences I have, I'm a little more hesitant to talk about because obviously when you talk about stuff like this, people tend to think you're crazy, and that's fine. But when you record stuff like that, when you record these type of stories, then you're basically immortalizing your craziness. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that I have a thing, I've never been diagnosed with it, take it with a grain of salt, but I have this thing called time dysmorphia. And what it is that I can't judge time. A day to you may feel like a day and a half to me. An hour to you may seem like 2-3 hours to me. Like, I have a really hard time judging time. And people go, oh no, it's just because you're not busy or you need to read a book or something like that. And I'm like, no, I have to have clocks around me. I have to have measurements of time because otherwise I have no idea how much time has passed. So I'm saying that because I don't remember, I've made this mistake before when talking about stories where I'll say, yeah, I think I was 25. I think this took place in 1998, and I'm wildly off by years. So I kind of have to place it in the context of other things that were going on. I believe the stories I'm about to tell you happened around 1996. So really before a good chunk of my listenership was even born. But I was out of high school, and I was probably in my second year of college. And I was living at my grandmother's house. I would sleep in the living room. My great-grandmother was still alive at the time, Grandma McGee. I would sleep in the living room. And the house always just seemed fairly eerie. This is out in Orangevale, California. It's a suburb/rural area on the border of Sacramento. The house was always creepy. I'd heard the occasional ghost story that had happened that my grandma Miller had seen a ghost of one of her sisters in the house peeking from around the corner. Just terrifying. But anyways, I would sleep in the living room on the floor. And I don't know what started it. I don't remember how it started, but I remember one night I was getting ready to go to sleep. I wasn't asleep yet. And I'm laying down on the floor. And I'm facing down the long living room. It was kind of an interesting design of a house. It had a really long living room. And I saw in the darkness, where there was just enough light coming in from the street light or the porch light outside the kitchen window, I saw the pitch black silhouette of a boy I'd say was about as tall as maybe like a 8 to 10-year-old boy. I don't see this is the weird thing. So the way that the light was coming in was that the room was flooded with darkness, but there was just enough light filling the room to kind of make out some details of just, like the couch and, the record player and the table and stuff like that. But the boy who stood there was so black. His body, his form was so black, it actually stood out into the darkness. Even though everything below the shoulders was completely covered by shadow, you could see where the fingertips ended, the shoes, the jeans. It was just void blackness. It was darker than shadow. And the second I realized what I was looking at, it ran towards me. Lightning speed. Before I could comprehend, it was within striking distance of me. Now, like I said, it was a long living room. The living room was probably about 12 to 18 feet, and it was just there on me. And I say striking distance, and that's not a figure of speech, because right when I saw how close it was, I swatted at it out of instinct, like you would swat away a bug. And I made it kind of like this weird, terrified yelp. I didn't yell, I just had this weird noise in my throat. And I'm laying down, and I just kind of swatted at it. And as my hand went through it, it tore. And little gold filaments kind of came out of the form. So it would be like if you scratched something and it just kind of shredded. I didn't feel anything, but I just saw gold filaments, like where it had torn, where almost like there was no substance to it, but once I put my hand through it, it basically tore open, and the edge of each rip had this little gold filament alongside it. That I hope you get that visual, because it was quite terrifying to me. And then it just wasn't there. There's no puff of smoke. There's no blink. It was simply wasn't there anymore. Now, I didn't go back to bed. And the rest of the time that I was staying at my grandma's house, I didn't like facing that way when I slept, but I almost felt like I had to. I never saw that again. But what I started to see were the dogs. I started to see these big, black, shadow dogs. They looked more like bulls. They had the shape, not necessarily with the horns. They had these. It was one of the. I think dog is the easiest way to explain it, because the heads seemed like canines, but they had more of the like torso of like a bull-shaped creature with kind of shorter back legs. The thing with the dogs they were always flat. It was like watching a two-dimensional image walk by. I didn't see them super often in the beginning, but when I saw them, I would get the sense that they were evil, sinister. The boy was the boy, and I got more of the sense that I don't know what I really thought of that emotionally, but the dogs terrified me. And again, it was that same thing, that dark beyond dark. And I would see them, usually, they would walk along the wall, because they were flat. So and this wasn't just in my grandma's house at this point, I was seeing these other places. If the wall had like a little corner, you would watch it and it would turn that corner like a shadow just being projected on the wall, and would kind of move around the room. Now, of course, at this point, I think I'm going crazy. At this point, I think I'm actually losing it. Because what rational person would see stuff like that? So, and let's, in this timeline, in 1997, 1998, I wasn't smoking marijuana. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't drinking. But I was seeing these things. And I always were looking for ghosts. I was always investigating and being intrigued by this stuff. But there was no chemical outside to this. But I was thinking, I'm obviously going crazy. I'm seeing things. These things don't actually exist. And then I started seeing what most people know of as the Shadow Man. But I was seeing a lot of them at once. The Shadow Men phenomenon is very common. You can find a ton of articles in it. I'll try to find some. Well, I won't try to find some. I'll link some in the show notes below. The Shadow Men generally come to people when they sleep. There's one of them that is sinister. They tend to wear trench coats, and they have these big top hats, and there's reports of them around the world. Now, the internet wasn't really a thing when this was going on. People had it, but it was like the dial-up. You didn't have all these resources. Everything you wanted to learn about ghosts, you had to find in a book, hopefully, then television, and then a friend telling you a spooky story. I had not heard of the Shadow Men that I can recall before I started seeing them. What was different about the Shadow Men, though, is one, I didn't get a sense that they were evil. I got a sense that they were almost beyond that. Very advanced. I got a feeling that they were curious, maybe. But not curious like they want to communicate with me. Curious the way that I'm curious when I see a caterpillar walk across the leaf. Like the scale of intelligence was so vast between me and whatever this was that I was nothing to it. The other weird thing was that they also were darker than dark, but when I looked at them, I could feel this weird thing where my eyes and my brain wanted to put color in them. Like I could almost perceive a shifting color within the darkness. It's really hard to explain because I'd look at it and my eyes would perceive the blackest of black, this dark, dark form, but my mind could almost see color inside of it. And I've mentioned stuff about ghosts and aliens where I go, I think it's more likely they come from another dimension. That's what this felt like. It felt like the colors that my mind was trying to perceive is something that's not perceivable in our dimension or with the limitations of our eyes. So our brain just shuts down and says it's black because it can't perceive the colors that this thing actually is. So at this point, I have two options. I'm going crazy and I'm seeing this stuff everywhere. Or this stuff is real. Now, the way I always dealt with this stuff was I need to have other people witness it with me. And I try to be, and nowadays I'm very good at this. Back then I was kind of okay with it, but I have a rule that I don't tell you what I'm seeing. I let you see it and me see it, and I ask you what you see. If we see the same thing, it's really there. If I go, oh my God, look at an old witch is flying across the moon, and then you go, oh my God, you're right, that doesn't help me at all. If I look up and I'll go, hey, look at that. Someone else looks up and they're like, is that a witch flying across the moon? I'm like, mm-hmm. So I brought a bunch of friends over to my grandma's house because that was a hotbed of activity. Now, like I said, I'd seen the dogs other places and things like that. I would generally see the shadow men in various places, but I remember telling people that I think my grandma's backyard is haunted because I'm seeing some weird stuff there. At this point, I'd actually had a room built onto my grandma's house because I was staying there for a long time. I love my grandparents. They're all passed away now, but it was a really good time living there. But so I brought over a bunch of friends, and I was with my buddy Josh and my friend Jackie and a couple other people. And we were all like, oh yeah, we're going to go ghost hunting, but let's start off at Jason's grandma's house because that place is totally creepy. And Jackie's 12, by the way, and I would have been, at this point in time, 1997, would have been about 19, 20, something around there. Josh was about the same age. So we're just all young kids, and then we got like this little girl hanging out with us. It was Josh's sister. So we go there, and everyone hangs back, because it was a really creepy house. Everyone hangs back but me and Jackie. And I saw one of the shadow people standing in the doorway between the garage and the backyard. And I had a really weird visual that time. It was nighttime, of course. That's when you go ghost hunting with your friends. And the shadow man is standing there at night. And I look at him, and these things are like 7-8 feet tall. And what I perceived, like looking at him, it seemed like it was daytime on the other side of him. Now, beyond his actual outline of his form, it was nighttime, but I had this weird sensation that it was daytime behind him or through him. There were two other shadow men standing in the back of this backyard at night. And it would have been fall. It was a little cold. Now, I told you my rule about not explaining stuff, but this was a time I didn't have that rule perfected. And me and Jackie walk up to the doorway. And Jackie says something to the effect that I'm really creeped out. And I said, there's one in front, because I told them, again, I wasn't 100% on my plan, but I will get to that in a second. I told him, I said, yeah, I think there's these shadow people walking in my backyard. I don't know how to explain them. They're just these big shadows walking around. I tell Jackie, I go, yeah, there's one in front of us right now. Now, her being a 12-year-old girl, not really thinking about anything, she sticks her hand right through the thing's chest. Now, of course, she doesn't see anything. To her, she's just sticking her hand through a doorway into the dark backyard. And what I see is her hand, where his chest should be, or is his stomach, because she's quite short. And she goes, it's warm. My hand's warm here. Now, I didn't tell her, oh, it looks like daytime in him. But she was feeling warmth where her hand was there. Now, I'm not going to let a 12-year-old girl be more brave than I am, so I put my hand into him as well. And it was warm. And I start to say something to her, and my hand is just where both of our hands are just sticking halfway through a doorway. Anyone walking by would just see two people sticking their hands through a doorway into the backyard at night. I say something to her, and I look over at her, and then I start to turn my hand, because I'm kind of almost feeling the temperature. And now my hand is basically, the back of my hand is facing me completely. All 5 fingers I'm looking at all 5 fingers. But the thing is, my pinky and my other index finger, the finger next to the pinky, they're gone. They're completely gone. All I see is my thumb, my ring, and my middle finger. And then is almost like just my hand was the other 2 fingers and that part of my hand were completely gone, enveloped in darkness. They didn't exist anymore. It wasn't a trick of the light. It was gone. And this is when I used my plan. I'm looking at my hand and it's flat out. And I go, Jackie, do you see something weird? And she looks over and she goes, your fingers are missing. We both pull our hands out. We run back to the car. That wasn't the last time I saw the shadow people. It was the last time I interacted with them on that way. I never tried to communicate with them, never tried to do a seance or Ouija board or anything like that. To me, those things don't seem like they would work because these things didn't necessarily seem like ghosts. But I don't know what they were. It's been a long, long time since I've seen a shadow man or one of those shadow dogs or the boy. But one of the last times I ever saw them, I remember I was driving home late at night, just driving through Orangevale. It's maybe like 2 a.m. I always stayed up late. And they were everywhere. I just saw 2 walking down the block here. A dog walking across the street, flat, but moving somehow. Sometimes they moved in pairs, sometimes alone. But I saw them everywhere that night. I didn't sleep that night either. True story. Totally true story. That was a clip from our daily podcast, Dead Rabbit Radio. Dead Rabbit Radio is available anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime news. If you want to hear the full episode that this clip came from, check the link below. Please like and subscribe. And hit that little bell, too. That does some magical stuff. Thanks, guys.